Going. We're live.
It worked. We're live.
We're back again.
It is officially Atomics on a Friday. On Friday.
It's always Friday.
Everywhere is a Friday. How's it going, Paul?
Living the dream. It's Friday. It's snowy.
Yes.
It's cold. The season
nice.
is upon us.
It's exciting.
It is.
How much snow did you get? A little bit of snow?
Yeah, like 3 inches. I was hoping for the 18 that they promised.
Yeah. 18 that would be glorious.
Take it.
Yeah. That would be an amount of snow. Yeah. I don't know. Should we wait a minute? Let people join up? I know we didn't advertise much.
I mean, we advertised right before we went live, so it's exactly as we expected.
Yeah. We're on time just as much as
Everybody
everybody else. Come on, y'all.
I mean, we did say start at noon, and it's 11 past, so it's good enough.
It's okay.
It's fine.
I always hear APT's never on time either, so we're good.
Are APTs even real?
Is it APT or APTs?
What if you have both?
Many APTs?
Multiple? No, that'd be wild.
Yeah. That would be a lot.
I don't know who it is, but hello and welcome.
Yes, welcome. I like the Pikachu.
Alex, bad idea. Yeah. I didn't know you could do emojis in there. I don't know. Technology's new to me. First time using it. Long time lurker, first time trier.
Yeah. This is not, what is it, Zoom? We're not like in Zoom pain right now.
Probably be going a lot smoother if it was just Zoom.
Yeah.
Although StreamYard is pretty clutch.
Yeah, it's working out.
Zoom.
It is working really good.
We got 3 people. I
know, we got a massive quorum today. It's like every influencer and how they say, like, I've been getting a lot of DMs lately. Everyone's been asking.
No, as we've been chatting and thinking about our next one from all the DMs we got from the last one.
Yeah. All the popularity and hype.
It should just start posting and tweeting our Twitch metrics after each stream.
Oh, yeah.
Like, look how awesome it went.
Yeah. It's on fire.
It's lit. As the kids say these days.
Yeah. It is. It slaps.
It slaps.
All right.
Might as well just jump in. Let me get this going. We got a lot to cover today.
It is recording, so.
And we'll officially be on YouTube at some point.
Yeah, that'll be exciting.
So you don't have to like catch it live and hope that we recorded it.
And hope we actually reshare it after.
Look, it's only episode 1. Last time was a pilot. It's fine.
Yeah, we were like clicking buttons last time still.
And we added more buttons this time, so expect many problems.
Yeah, and we have like multiple screen shares happening. This is going to be a barn burner. I hope everybody stays for this one.
Yeah.
It like drops to 2.
Everybody just gives us back to 0 and we're just talking ourselves. But you know what? It's fine.
It works. We're good. Okay. We do have an agenda today. It's a lot of content. I don't know how we're going to get through it.
Keep going.
We'll talk about us, who we are, because we didn't even do that last time. But we're going to dive into T1569.002, which is service execution. We're going to talk about in the wild examples, atomic testing, and simulations. We also used a new thesaurus this time, and the word interesting will be removed, which is kind of exciting. It's very interesting. And then we're going to get into detections and mitigations and probably a discussion probably throughout the whole thing. And then we'll talk about, I guess, the next time on atomics on a Friday. It is Friday. Cool. I'll go first.
Technically, you're first, so
Yeah, I was gonna
I'll
say
go first.
my brain's on the left. So I'm Michael Haag. I am a senior threat researcher at Splunk. I'm M_Haggis on Twitter. I was gonna add like the Git links and all that, but Mastodon, that's the new one, right? I didn't get a chance to do that. I guess I've been in this industry 10, 12 years now. And I started from doing like PC support, fixing printers, dot matrix printers, and then moving my way up to, sysadmin and working on networks, securing networks, managing large virtual infrastructure and stuff like that, which is kind of where the a lot of my background from like the sysadmin side. Ended up leading like the security program for a Fortune 150. From the Fortune 150, we went to building, just pretty much everything you could imagine, but also defending against everything you could imagine. APTs was kind of like the common threat that we had. So it was really fun, very hands-on, which then led to my time at Red Canary. I was at Red Canary for 4 years. And then I've been at Splunk for about 2 years now. So a lot of my experience is EDR, endpoint telemetry. I'm not good at network, but I like to act like I am. A little bit about me. Go for it, Paul.
I think you missed the biggest point. Atomic Red Team co-creator,
Oh yeah, there's that little project, Atomic Red Team.
That small one that we're kind of just talking about, but it's fine. We'll skip over that.
Yep. So Atomic Red Team. So we started Atomic Red Team at Red Canary, and it is what it is today, right? Like I think it's probably one of the most popular free open source attack simulation tools out there. It's used by pretty much every enterprise breach attack sim tool, which is probably one of the neatest things as a co-founder of a free project you could see, right? Is your project being used by pretty much everything that you would have to pay for. And then also folks who are just getting into the industry and they want to learn either red teaming or learn, whatever it may be, just understanding a certain attack. So that's been really cool to see. Anyway, tear it up, Paul.
Which is kind of funny because that is how I learned of Red Canary, which was the original Atomic Fridays, was the original name back in the day. So I am a principal incident handler at Red Canary. Been at Red Canary a little over 3 years. I started out very similar, doing help desk type things for legal sector, then moved into traditional SOC analyst, and then into Red Canary, where I spend my days basically playing in fire and solving fires for our customers, as well as working in trying to support Atomic Red Team. So super excited to kind of rip this. And we've been talking about bringing this back for quite some time and just really sharing information and how to think about and run tests, look for the data, build better detections, and just kind of talk security and have some fun with it. I think it's the biggest thing. So just kind of jump in.
It's fun. All right. Service execution. You want to take us away here, Paul?
Yes. So today we'll be doing service execution. So service executions specifically on Windows. So the service control manager is kind of what contains it. There is going to be kind of our focus point. Basically, what the service control manager does is just maintains a database of installed services. They are configured in the registry. It is RPC based, so you have a client and server interaction. So the client is the thing that says, hey, I want to make a server, modify it, query it, etc. And then the server, which we'll focus on as services.exe, will be the one actually doing implementation and returning results. So why are we talking about it? Well, it's kind of multifaceted in what you can use it for. Most commonly is for lateral movement. You also have execution, privilege escalation, but of course you also have persistence. Some of the requirements, well, not necessarily needed, like SMB 445 or 135. It is used commonly for when you're writing files to the share for execution. But you do also need administrative privileges on the endpoint that you are trying to create or execute the service on, which is going to make for some interesting things as we kind of talk about it today.
And you do need admin privileges. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah. So we'll have to be local administrator on the current or the remote endpoint that we're going to execute our tests on. We're actually going to do both. Also dig into atomic test harnesses, and we're also going to touch on drivers today, everybody's favorite thing.
Yeah.
So before we go into it, let's talk a little bit about the prevalence of it, of using services. So kind of two examples here. One comes from an interesting Twitter thread where Samir over at Elastic identified some service creation, where this one is using drivers as bringing in a vulnerable driver for potentially using for resistance privilege escalation. And then the other one being from the DEFA report, which is the awesome shirt you're wearing, showing PS-exec-like execution from Cobalt Strike during an investigation that they identified. So we're going to kind of look at some different examples and use cases of how services are being used in breaches.
Yeah, and I think I just saw a tweet recently. Someone was almost like a little blown away that PS-exec, when you use it for remoting, it uses the PS-exe VC, or is it SVC? You remember off the top
so
of your head?
PS-exe SVC. So to actually write a binary into C Windows, if I remember correctly, which we'll actually jump into. And in this case, this actually uses the admin $share, which is where the SMB comes into play for kind of the lateral movement aspect from like C2 frameworks. And a lot of them use the exact same Win32 API call, which we'll jump into, which is create service W.
Money. All right.
So kind of the most common things, which we touched on already, one being PS-exec, the other being in-packet, specifically SMB exec. They also have a services implementation. If you go into their repo, they have some great kind of scripts, very, very well-written utility and tool all around. A lot of it is direct RPC calls. So one of the main differences, and we're going to go into a little Pepe Sylvia map of services that Jared Atkinson's over Spectre Ops did a phenomenal job on. Kind of touches on the different layers that occur when you go to make different function calls. So one of the big ones, again, PS-exec, very commonly seen and used tool. In-packet SMB exec is another one. One of the core things that we see a lot, which is defaults. Here are the default things that are dropped into SMB exec. And we'll touch on a few interesting points. The biggest one being the service name, BTO. Not only do vuln scanners implement this using the default, but we see commonly during intrusions that adversaries will just rip this as is, no changes, but they are customizable and they are changeable. So kind of makes for something interesting from that aspect of, well, it is kind of brittle of just using BTO as part of your detection. It works and you will catch it.
And so the screenshot in the bottom right is from, is that in-packet?
Yeah, so that's kind of the actual remote shell section, to point out. So what you'll see is they have a bunch of defined variables set. So when they create the calls and then they start the execution from the shell aspect, you'll kind of see these the write-outs. So looking at the self.output, so writing to localhost, then a self-share, and then whatever the output of the file name is, there is, which in that case, I believe is the underscore output, and there's some other things. But admin, $share is going to become one, as well as then again, SMB, because they'll be writing for the binary for the service execution.
Got it. And then for all the listeners that we have today and that will be watching this live, how prevalent, what is our prevalence of in-packet? How widespread are we seeing this with adversaries, red teams? Is this like a constant thing, or what are we up against? What do you think, Paul?
I think it's more prevalent than we realize. I think for a long time it was thought of as just a pen testing tool. You'd only see it on internal pen tests. Red teams wouldn't use it because it is very loud. And they even, if you go and read the documentation on SMB exec in the repo, it even says like, this is really loud. Like it really is. There's a lot of opportunities, especially with SMB exec. But what's interesting here is that you definitely are seeing this. There's been some interesting blog posts from Microsoft, from CrowdStrike, that are kind of bringing more shadow. And even CISA wrote, I forgot what they call it. They had like a posting that talked about in a federal investigation that they used WMI SMB exec. See this on the regular, is now being seen, sanctioned approved tools. Yeah. Listener number 3 here. Well, thanks for being listener number 3.
Yes.
Top
That's
3.
Proud moment.
If we had like stickers, we'd ship them out, but we don't have those yet. Maybe someday.
Soon.
Soon.
It's on the list. All right, let's get to the function graph and then get to our fun demo.
Pepe Sylvia. So
this is pretty much how when I saw this, I was like, yeah.
So
do you want me to click next, or do you got it?
Yeah. Go ahead for
we'll
the
go
next slide.
Okay.
The image is really tough to see here, and we have the links. So this is, again, I mentioned earlier, with some Jared Atkinson over at Spectre Ops, coming out with this idea of function flow call, or function call graph, excuse me, as well as some other interesting and really great blog posts on kind of deep diving and understanding the depth of this, basically how you can use this technique. So at a high level, what you see on the yellow is the tool execution, and then it goes through the different API calls that it calls. So things like ps.exec, what's the API call it uses in order to create the service? And so if we think of the different tools, InPacket, built-in tools like sc.exe, PowerShell has the new service module. They all use different API calls, but at the end of the day, they go through an API flow, and then they end at the same result, which is the services.exe is the RPC server, so that is going to be responsible for the implementation of it. And in this case, registry is where all the information about the service is stored. What's the image binary it's going to execute? What's the display name? What type of service is it? Is it its own? Is it shared? Is it a kernel driver, which we'll touch on later? So it holds all that information that's needed to identify it. And what we think about sometimes is we focus on too much on the tool and how it actually does and what it actually does. So we think of trying to detect the different ways that an adversary could call service, sc.exe. Well, sure, we could focus a lot of time on that, but ultimately, what are we trying to determine, right? In this case, potentially a service was installed or leveraged for whatever the objective is. So we're going to look at different methods, and again, touching on kind of in the middle of the graph, where you kind of see at the lower bottom, you'll see the RPC calls. So that's where you're going to see like the InPacket being used. Things from like not just services, but WMI They also have a bunch of other utilities that are just using direct RPC calls. And what that causes is that potentially can evade where EDRs may be hooking certain DLLs. So they're kind of bypassing that. So doing it directly from the network level. But then there's certain spots along the way where if you can evade some of those function calls, you can evade some of the logging along the way. And one of the, at the certain point, you can just write directly to the registry if you have admin permissions, but that would require a reboot. So there's different ways that an adversary could jump into any of these API calls, but still end up at the same result. So we can kind of think about it this way. But again, don't want to spend too much time on this because it is a really good graph, and we could just kind of dig into a whole bunch of stuff. But definitely check it out. We'll have links later on to dig into it.
Yeah, I went ahead and dropped the link into the chat.
Yes.
I think it leads to
Perfect.
it.
Yeah. So that's the start of the thread. Really great thread. And then he has there's associated blog posts with it from the funnel fidelity, capability abstraction, which is a big one that kind of ties into this. All of those combined are great series and definitely worth reading to think about depth of detection, kind of like in this thought process.
Rock on. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and demo stuff. I think that's why this is what everyone's been asking for in the DMs, and I'm getting a lot of requests for our demos.
Yeah, followers.
Yeah, all the followers. So yeah, it looks like we're going to start with Atomic Red Team. Look at T1569.002, which I think there's 4 or 5 Windows tests in there, something like that. And then where you have the more recently updated Atomic Test Harness, which is pretty awesome. And some additional Atomic tests that I have on my repo. Again, I'll share these links out as Paul progresses here in our demo and go from there.
Yeah.
Share it up. Do you want me to full screen you? You can do that.
Yeah, it'd be great. I'm not going to be able to
Okay.
see any of the stuff, so if there's like chats, just give me a whirl. Is my VMware like freaking out? Can you see that, or is that just me?
It's a little freaking out, but it's fine. Just ship it.
All right, we'll ship it. So let's kind of jump in. That's what happens when you have too many tabs. Okay, so atomic tests. So if we did, where is it? Okay, so the first one we'll do is going to be using sc.exe to create it. So again, it will require administrative permissions. Should have had this queued up, but I did not.
Well,
Test number, I think it's 2. Is 2 the correct one for SC?
SC is atomic number 1.
Number 1. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to leave it as is.
You could always do a show details.
I probably should have done that.
Yeah.
But here we go. So we just ripped it. And it failed. Fantastic.
But there's still an event. You still got a good event out of here because you got your service create. I'll drop this test into the chat as we're rolling here.
I totally forgot to start Sysmon too.
Yep.
That's what happens when you do it live. Okay, so
so yeah, I mean, I think like the simplest, if you want to do show details, that's a good walkthrough of how using like SC to create and start. Go ahead.
Yeah, so at a high level, what we're using is the service control. So it's a built-in Windows binary, and basically what it's doing is stepping in and saying, okay, I'm going to manually create one. I'm going to give it a service name. I'm going to tell it the binary path or the thing to execute, which in this case would be down here, of writing a file to, using PowerShell to write a file to the C drive. And then it would go start it, and then it deletes it. So that's kind of like the whole step through of this particular atomic test. So that's one mechanism or one way that we can use to create a service. So that's locally. Now, PowerShell also has an implementation of new service, but what's interesting is that it's hard-coded that you can't create a remote service on another endpoint. It's in, you go into the PowerShell's repository because it's open source. You can look in that. It's hard-coded only for the local host, so it can't be overridden, so it stays on the local system. Whereas you could create a service remotely. ps.exe is another we're going to dig into. I can't use Atomic Red Team because I broke my lab. But what I do have is manual execution of it. So basically what I'm going to do is launch ps.exe on a remote host and launch command prompt. So what it's going to do is just go, it's going to open a handle, it's going to create the service, execute it, and then return back command prompt. Basically, now I'm acting like I have interactive shell. So in this case, I can then look at the various things like host name. So as you can see, this is on the separate box that I have, as well as the user of who I'm executing as. ps.exe does allow you to specify username, password to use. You can also tell it which level. So if you want to run it as system versus whatever user context you're running in, they'll pass it through. But now let's kind of touch on.
I got 2 questions.
Yeah.
On the first atomic test that you did there for the SC creates, are you volume-wise, like if an organization was just, can I go find every service create or every time someone runs sc.exe create, like is it just horrible? Like is it, how bad? You know, I know I shouldn't alert on it, but how much noise do you think people are adding new drivers daily or process services and whatnot?
sc.exe don't have like a baseline, but that should be pretty light, especially on standard user workstations. Servers, depending on what it is, you may see that. So often depending from software installs, etc. But from a day-to-day perspective, in my opinion, it'd be probably rare to see specifically sc.exe called in that aspect. Now, again, depending on the environment, depending on what tools, software, etc., how things are working, right? If you're using ps.exe to do a lot of your traditional sysadmin stuff, then you're going to see a lot of potential service creates. when we start looking at different log sources or methods to detect service creation or lateral movement from that aspect.
Cool.
That's where you run into some stuff.
Yeah, kind of interesting. And even looking at like that bin path, I was just thinking like as a detection opportunity, looking at, if you have service creation, or if you can, as a previous slide we showed was 7045 service creates. I was just thinking like you could even look for, actual file paths within that bin path there. It's kind of an interesting hunt there. Even like this ps.exe calling command, or even in ransomware type engagements, you see ps.exe abused and spawning a process or shipping something across using ps.exe. It's kind of a interesting avenue here.
Yeah, so actually I should probably do it on the other one. And we can touch into it a little bit. But some of the things that we can do are pipes. So because RPC needs some communication, you will have, which I forgot to include on the other one. But that's going to be one of your defaults for pipes. I don't think that's actually not the right one, but service is one. And then you obviously have process creates. You have registry modifications. So on the target system, what we would have seen in the registry from the sc.exe. So if we manually ran it, if I let me create flag in,
I'll full screen it so we can see everything here.
Service failed to create. Okay.
Oh, different name.
Golden. Okay. Now let's open up the registry editor. So as kind of alluded to, on the local machine, under system, current control set, and then services, this is where it's stored within the registry that sc or services.exe, modify it. So what we can do is then just jump into, it's totally safe. Yep, so totally safe services. So this is the original one, and it failed because it already existed. In this case, here's the new one. So you get some basic ones. So the type is going to be its own. Start is auto. You get the object name, the image path, which is again going to be the thing that it gets executed as. The other thing it doesn't have is the display name, which you can set. So display name will be set, which will be kind of like the that's what I'm looking for. The friendly name, the thing you would see, versus sometimes if you go open up services and you jump into it, you see kind of some weird naming, but then you see like the nice friendly name next to it. That's what the display name would be, another object here. So regardless of how it gets created, at the end of the day, in the registry, that's where it's going to get stored. So regardless if you're using ps.exec, sc.exe, new service module from PowerShell, or some other tool that calls one of those, as we saw in the nice Pepe Sylvia mapping, there's probably like at least 20 that were listed there of API calls that could be used. So that's kind of interesting. Now,
did you pull up your event log yet on the Sysmon host showing the ps.exe SVC? Just kind of that, or you have that piece. So that's, yeah.
But I do have this.
Yeah.
So default, again, we get the ps.exe SVC is going to be written to the registry. Again, exact same registry hive path, and then we get the basic. So in this case, it's going to copy over ps.exec SVC. Now, a subtle difference for something like an in packet is it will write to, you have your open shares. So things like admin $, IPC $, right? So anything that's open where you're going to have the administrative permissions. So just because they're open, you have to be able to write to them. And now one of the things we'll touch on later is some mitigations, specifically focusing on workstation side, because there's a lot of things there's a couple things that could be done that may seem daunting, but will greatly reduce the attack surface, especially from a lateral movement standpoint, as well as execution standpoint, specifically with SMBs and services.
Random question. If I, as an organization, is there a decent way for me to ban the ps.exe service, say we don't use ps.exec, my admins, they don't like it. They don't use it, right? Or we removed it or something. Is there a good way for me to go and say like ban this service from ever running? Or a way for me to like track it better, or I don't know. Is there I don't know what the right word might be, but is there a better way for me to stop this from showing up tomorrow?
Yeah, there's a few things that could be done. Which one of which we'll touch on is to limit the file rights inbound for those admin shares. So workstation to workstation, Jane in accounting to Mark in finance or marketing shouldn't be, using like, / host name / admin $ or even $. So preventing workstation to workstation SMB inbound is going to greatly reduce that because the tools that are going to write to those. Now, from the ps.exec standpoint, depending on which utilities you have, you could use EDR to block based on file name because ps.exec uses the default. You could do binary hashes, but at that point, you're pretty much playing whack-a-mole because there's the opportunity to potentially change the service names, the file names, different hashes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that point. GPOs, if I remember correctly, I think you can block or prevent execution in specific paths. So if you remember looking at our first sysmon, actually, I don't remember which one, but actually, no, it was this one. So if you gave it the path of, whatever your system root is, and then ps.exec service, GPO could potentially prevent that. It's been a minute since I've looked at execution blocking with GPO, but I think full path was needed to identify that. But if somebody knows the correct answer, please feel free to ship a comment and confirm that.
Yeah, I was just thinking like even like an app control type product or something, and yeah,
definitely. WDAC, I know there's, in which we did, I think in the mitigation slide, there's like attack service reduction rules, specifically one calling out ps.exec specifically. So that makes it interesting is that you have built-in utilities from Microsoft. WDAC is a little bit complicated. It's not just a nice point and click, but it is a valid option with WDAC or attack service reduction rules if you have like the Defender for Endpoint stuff.
Rock on. Cool, man.
Cool. Last thing I want to touch on before we jump into the driver side of things is atomic test harnesses. So as we kind of touched on, there's multiple different ways in which you could call to create a service. And so if we only focus on the tool, we're potentially missing different data sources that we could use for trying to identify service creation, service execution. So atomic test harnesses was created by Red Canary, Matt Graber leading it. And Jonathan Johnson over at Spectre Ops actually pushed an update to the atomic test harness for Windows services. And the idea is to look at different depth points that you could call different ways to create a service. And so what this does is allows you to validate, okay, if I don't use sc.exe or focus on a particular tool, but the method in which they use. So in the case of sc.exe or again, ps.exec, create service W is the API function, and then we can step through that graph. We could do something like an RPC call. We could do direct registry modifications. And so what we'll do here is kind of just give you an example. If we look at the different variants, so again, direct registry modifications, sc.exe, or Win32 API call. Also, WMI is another method in which we could do it. So if we just go through and let's say verbose, maybe it'll work. And it'll go through. And now if we went and again looked and it spits out some great information of what it does or the different components of it. So in this case, we know again, HKLM, system current control set services, and then the service name we gave it. So what hopefully this is doing is allowing us to go and as we execute these tests, see where and at what point we can detect them. Because if we're only, again, focusing on, let's say I'm only looking at sc.exe as my detection, and I do something like use WMI, well, I potentially completely miss it, right? Or in the same case of just if I'm looking only at specific things and I do direct registry modifications. When we do direct registry modifications, there's no event logs. There's no 70, 46, 45, whatever that
45.
one is.
Yep.
Yeah, 45 or the 4697s or 4967s. Again, we wrote these in a different slide. But those are going to get bypassed depending on, again, which API calls or which API flow occurs. You could evade some of those registry creates, and especially in the case of a direct registry modification, there will be no service was created. Now, the interesting thing about doing it with registry is that it requires a reboot of the system in order for it to be registered with the service control manager. So just because you create it and then you say, hey, go start it, you're going to get a nice error and it's going to say, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. This thing doesn't exist, even though it's written in the registry. The system requires a reboot, and then it'll get loaded up, and then you'd be able to do your interaction with that service.
That's actually super cool, because it almost like it has that like longer term persistence piece with it, because you're not hitting SC on the command line, which most likely will be captured somewhere by somebody. And 7045s, I would hope most folks are tracking that to some degree, especially with Windows events. And then the WMI stuff, like is there a way for us to track that better? Like, do we get that with Sysmon or anything like that? Like, I mean, which, do you know which yeah. Is there an EDR that helps us here with any WMI type queries?
Some may have that capability. Some definitely don't.
Okay.
And so that's where a good defense in depth is going to occur. Just relying on, I have EDR and it should give me all the things, is probably not the greatest thing, but there's different, again, where we start to look and understand at the different methods that could be done from a depth perspective. That allows us to then focus on the different layers that we have of where the tools sit, where they can see it, and what they can't see, right? Because once we identify what we can't see, then we can try and figure out what can we use in order to fill that gap. Right, we all know detection drives prevention, prevention drives detection. So when we kind of think of it that way and start to understand the depth at which our tools can detect things, that kind of helps us put us into a better spot versus just saying, here's the newest C2 framework, what does it do? And then you go and look at the code at a lot of them, and they all use create service W, which follows the exact same API flow. And it results in the exact same thing. So you'll still get your 7045s, you'll still get your registry modifications, you'll even probably have some nice EDR data for some of that as well. Versus like an in-packet is just going to give you the RPC, has a different flow, but still end result of the 7045 as well as registry modifications.
That's awesome. And I had not messed with the atomic test harness piece enough yet, but I noticed that if you want, do you have the code nearby or standing by?
I do.
Yeah, I just like flipped through like the variants piece here. There's 4 different variants. The different start types and things like that. That's pretty awesome that these, it really helps, like as a defender, if you really want to go through and validate your coverage and or visibility into these types of things. And like, even for like an EDR product, I mean, like years ago, everybody complained about the volume, but I think volumes, it's not solved. Like there's still a lot of data, right? But I mean, you may have to go and look at the registry for these things, but at least with these different variants, you can kick them off, test the different variants, see what you get in your telemetry. Maybe there's a gap, right? Like it's very awesome. That's one thing I really, really love about test harnesses. These are great.
Yeah, and what's interesting is when you're thinking of testing, especially against EDR, and you're trying to either A, buy one, or B, determine if you're going to switch, does it record registry? Some do some filtering, some record everything. So it's really determines of like what you're ultimately looking for. But this is a great way, again, to just go with the different layers and the different methods, so that it's not just throw it against the wall and see what hits, or I'm only focused on, hey, here's 4 atomic red team tests. All 4 of those got seen, but the minute we change it up a little bit, now it's not detected. Now what? So I think it helps to, again, start with the breadth of coverage, which is where Atomic Red Team starts out, and then Atomic Test Harnesses allow us to focus and hone in on the specific techniques and go the depth of our ability to detect and potentially prevent the different things.
Yep. I had to plug it. I have a Sysmon config that just kind of dumps everything that I always use in my ranges. Just gotta hunt naked. So I had to throw it in there. Yep. So collect everything.
Which reminds me, I should stop Sysmon because it is collecting everything, because that is the That's the rule I use, or the config I use.
Hunt naked or go home. Awesome.
All right. So that's kind of
Yeah.
a starter, but that's not the only type of service. That's a portion of service for like basic code execution or lateral movement or even persistence. Now, you have some interesting points on the other type of service, which is the drivers, the kernel drivers. So let's step into that. Let's touch on that.
Cool. You or me? What do you want me to do?
Well, that's you. The driver's not my piece. You're the expert. You're the.
Oh my gosh.
This is your ball game now.
Okay, share this thing up. All right, so yeah, so I have my notes. I'll drop this link as well into the channel there. I did a couple of presentations over the last, gosh, I can't believe it's been a year. I don't know why that one shows up, but it's under drivers, and under here, I did it for RSA Dark Arts, and then similar for, I think it was like the SANS threat hunting DFIR Summit. Just hunting Windows U-boats with cyber depth charges, as in Windows drivers. And I find this space really interesting because I feel like, so over time, the whole story is right. Over time, adversaries will bring in either a vulnerable driver, a signed driver, something into the environment that they're attacking, load it up either to elevate their privileges or to persist, right? And I've seen this in the past to where an adversary delivered a driver, installed it, and just sat there, and that's what we got, right? And I've seen too in the past where in two places now where it was missed, the driver piece was missed, and the only way we caught it was because the host was beaconing out to something. And another instance was we did driver inventory, and within the inventory was something highly suspect sitting on the host. So drivers are really interesting to me. And so, yeah, so I find this really cool. Check out the slides. There's some really neat things in there related to like signed drivers that were used by this group called Daxon. Daxon had a bunch of signed ones and everything like that. And there's some really cool, like, different changes that they did, and not changes, but just things that make it stand out, but also very hard for folks to see and do. Yep. Thank you, sir. I thought I had that. Yeah. So I also, within that same repo, I have a C Wolf, just a simple setup of a driver. This uses the Capcom driver. It will copy it to the driver's directory. And again, you don't have to even put it in there. You could load up this driver from anywhere. And similar to what we saw with the atomic test harness and the atomic test, you can just standard sc create, give it your path, which again, it can be, execution of a command like what we saw with Paul. And in this case, now we're telling it to be a kernel type. And if you look at the atomic test harness code as well, I think there's 4 or 5. It has all the options, but kernels in there as well. So if you actually wanted to just rotate with the atomic test harness, you could just sit there and change the types, play with all the different ones and see what you get on the other side. Or as we always say in atomic, send it downrange, see what you find. And then it starts it, it outputs it, and things like that. And so again, this is just a Capcom driver. And I went ahead and I did 2 things. I ran the bat already earlier using the U527 name coming from the driver's directory. So copied it, ran it. And then I said, well, hey, like, that's going to stand out just really quick. Like, why don't we also put it in the C users public and then do the same thing, start it and see what happens. So that's all I really changed. I am using the hunt naked sysmon config because, again, you're not hunting naked, you're not really hunting. So this is the 7045 events that we've been talking about. I have it running in here. And you can see pretty quickly, you have a driver or a sys file loading up out of the C user's public path. And it does come up as a service type of kernel mode driver. You get the service name, like that happy display name and things like that. So it's all here. which is pretty cool. And then I think so I was messing with the atomic test harness as well. And something that I was kind of goofing off with was just kind of playing with like some of the commands, but I didn't go as deep as what we saw with Paul. I just kind of was goofing off, just playing with, here I am trying to find it. But here's like the different registry pieces. So like sysmon data now in a sim, what does it kind of look like from that regard? So here is the actual like target object of within current control set services. This is the driver, or the name that I had used was FIMM, and then all the different pieces that there. So if you, we'll just pivot on that real quick, because that's actually probably more interesting in a way. It'll at least show us all the different pieces that were mapped. And similarly, what we saw in regedit, same type of things, same file, key objects, and all that. It's kind of cool. Yeah, same. So this is just a query that I have where it's just saying, hey, of interest within any organization, a driver that is, titled .sys has the extension .sys. If it's loading outside of sort of like these standard driver paths, I always think that's interesting, because it typically means like some third-party software is loading up its own custom driver, a video game, a game, like, whatever it might be loading something up. And that's really interesting to me. So in sysmon, you're looking at event code 6, what I think is driver load. And I'm just saying, show me everything that's not in the sort of like default paths. Every org will be different. Your default path might also be like printers and things like that. Or you might need to filter out certain things within your org. So add that there. And then just for kicks, I'm just going to remove that, just so you can kind of see what it looks like coming from sysmon. And again, now we're just kind of seeing everything. And yeah, sysmon is not as rich as far as the telemetry goes, for showing like binary data. Some EDRs will show you a full plethora of like everything from all the metadata from the PE itself. So if you want to do some really good hunting, I'd start there, looking at drivers, just kind of like loading and looking around, and seeing where they're at different places in your org. Yep, that's just the same thing, and probably nothing as of interest. I don't know why I showed it twice.
So,
double tap it.
Question for you.
Yep.
Why are adversaries bringing in drivers? If I have the ability to run a system, then I pretty much own the system. What benefits, or what are we seeing, and why adversaries are bringing in drivers? What do you think?
I feel like it's just like a method to persist even longer. And I feel like a lot of orgs are not doing the inventory piece for drivers, because it's kind of awkward and hard to go through and like look for drivers in your organization. Like I don't remember doing it much other than outside of the EDR tool that we had, and other than like inside of a Splunk or something, looking for drivers. But they could blend in a lot easier. They sit at that ring 0 within the kernel, so it's like it's God mode. But again, it's like, why? If you're already admin, why would you need a kernel driver to be God mode, right? So I feel like it's more about persistence and just staying in that organization even longer. Yeah, what do you think? I don't have like the strongest opinion about it all, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have like a good answer. I like hypothesis, if you will, but I think especially vulnerable drivers bringing in for like code execution, to your point, like just stealthier and more like harder to remove. It's not just like, hey, go kill this process and then I'm good to go, right? There's a little bit more to it, especially sitting at like your point in the kernel space. There's a lot more. And then, but I think we're kind of, which we saw earlier, is some even commodity malware is using vulnerable drivers. And to your point, I think game dev anti-cheat systems.
Yep.
absolutely insane with this.
Oh yeah.
If you're interested in drivers, like the gaming space is a really good spot to go look at, especially from drivers and how anti-cheats work. There's a great no starch press book on that kind of digs into that, especially at that low level side of things. But I think it's an interesting thing we're going to start to potentially try and see more of. But I don't know if we just have some of the tools have the visibility to see that driver interaction or usage.
I think that's sort of I think it's awesome that drivers are becoming more of a topic now, because 2 years ago, I mean, I think they were talked about, but not as heavy as they are now, or as abused as they are now. And I also think, and I'm sure there's somebody out there or somebody will say that it's just like, yeah, you're wrong. But in my opinion, I think too that the reason why we don't see them abused 5 years ago is because nobody was looking for them being abused 5 years ago. Because a vulnerable driver, I can't just I'm looking at my screen right here and I see this Xbox one, right? I don't know. Looking at this alone doesn't tell me that this is malicious, or not malicious, but vulnerable. How do I know a driver is vulnerable? And to me, that's the hard part. It's just like, I could create a list based on what other people are saying are vulnerable, but there's this other one that is the unknown, right? And someone's going to pull it out of the woodworks and start dropping it on machines, but I don't know if it's malicious or vulnerable driver or anything like that. So it's a really weird whack-a-mole piece, and I don't think we see it in reports enough, because I don't think people are looking at it enough. There's just not visibility into it.
Well, what's interesting though is 4 years ago plus, you've co-wrote a blog about hunting drivers being abused. So it's funny because I feel like we're kind of like, hey, we did talk about it a few years back, and now it's kind of coming back in. But to your point, it's not there unless somebody's looking for it.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah,
it absolutely could be there, and it has probably been used and abused, but because we didn't look for those, we're not seeing the prevalence. But I think as we start to shine more of a light on it, I think it'll get more and more visibility. We're going to start to see more of it, right? Just kind of like Impact It. I guarantee you Impact has been used in incidents and breaches for years, but we weren't necessarily thinking about it, or, the connotation that it's only used by pen testers hindered the fact that we weren't looking for it. But I would put money that it's definitely been used, but we're starting to see it more and more.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's probably the exact same thing here, in that what's the word? I'm trying to think the right word. It's the what you have visibility into. It's the casting the net thing, right? That I shared on Twitter the other week. It's like, what you have visibility into is what you have visibility into, and you're going to say you catch everything based on that information. And if your EDR is filtering and you don't know what they're filtering, therefore you're just assuming that you have everything you need, based on that. And I don't know. It's interesting. I had to drop that word because it is a really interesting, hard problem to solve here with drivers, or even like you're saying, even with Impact It, like, it could be used every day in every intrusion. But if you're not collecting the right data to know, you don't know. It's like, this is a good topic. Like, I think this is a really good point, because it's just like the LSAS stuff we were talking about. There's multiple tools that dump credentials, but it's classified as Mimikatz, not naming names, but you know what I mean? Like, it's
always Mimikatz. If there's it's only Mimikatz. There's no other.
It's the only one.
No other tool that does it, right? So you just detect Mimikatz.
But you know what I mean? There's 25 ways to skim credentials, or skim cards, whatever you want to call it. But it's just like, it's not always Mimikatz.
Yeah. And let's say I took another method, like out mini dump, poured it to C#, and then named my binary Mimikatz. Is it really Mimikatz, right? Like, so you have that kind of the masquerading thing.
How do you know, as a defender on the other end of this, if you're just looking at create remote thread into LSASS, is it always Mimikatz based on, the granted access and the call trace? You're just like, it's Mimikatz, like stamp approved. You know what I mean? Like it's
At that point, though, does it matter what tool is used? The result is the same. Credentials were potentially dumped, right? If you're saying like, hey, I proved that credentials were dumped, at that point, who cares what tool is used? It may be a good after the fact, because if it was, hey, Mimikatz was literally downloaded straight from a GitHub repo, why didn't your tool see that, right? Like, yes, then it's trying to figure it out. So then you can go back and look. But at the time, I think sometimes we focus too much on like, what is that single C2 framework used in the middle of an incident, or what is that tool that was used? Who cares at that point, right? Like, the result is you had creds dumped, you had execution occur. We got to go respond to it, contain it, remediate it, and now we can go back and try to do some of that.
Yeah, it's right along the lines of go after the behavior, not the tool.
Yeah. And I
what
think
was like the top threat recently that we saw? It was Cobalt. No, the top behavior was Cobalt Strike or something like that. You tweeted it out.
I was reading a report, and one of the things in this list of malware families was not like the same. And
I gotta
one
find
of
it.
them was Cobalt Strike, which we could probably get some intel people and researchers and other people and have a great table debate of, is Cobalt Strike a malware family? But I think there's been a lot of emphasis and focus on that type of stuff. But we're concerned with new hot C2 framework, the Beaverette C2 Sliver.
Here it is.
Mythic.
34% was Cobalt Strike, and then like Agent Tesla was number 2.
Which I don't get that grouping, because they're two separate things. But sure, again, probably above my pay grade of where I'm at, and some smart people could probably justify or clarify that. But here we are. But yeah, kind of going back to it, which is when we think about, oh no, new C2 framework drops, how do I detect it, right? It's not necessarily the thing. You're looking at the behaviors that it does, right? If we go look at 5 open source frameworks and we look at the lateral movement aspect, I would put money that a lot of them are using the same API call to do the service execution for lateral movement from the service control manager of create service W. I know of 2 that are open source that use the exact same call, and the end result is the same. It goes to the exact same API flow. And I bet if we went and did that in other ones, I bet we'd find the exact same thing. So again, when we're focused on the behavior and how the things work versus the tool itself, we have a better understanding of what occurs, and we can drop and then start to focus on better detection at depth, which is a great starting point for, right to your point, which is, I'm just getting started, Atomic Red Team, plethora of tests. I want to test the efficacy of my detection at depth. That's where atomic test harnesses come. They're really targeted. They're really specific to that technique and allow you to go to the levels without necessarily having to understand and go create them yourself. So I think that's where you can get really the combination of the two. Even though there may be some overlap, it really helps to just be able to throw it against the wall. See, should I know these things get caught from my EDR, MDR, NDR, whatever? Yeah. But then if I start to go at depth, now I can actually start to think about the different layered approach that I can look at, which I think makes it interesting.
I think the last thing I'll drop here is Elastic wrote, I put the blog in the channel there, but the Elastic team dropped a excellent blog a little while back on vulnerable drivers. And they also released a bunch of Yara rules, which I feel like they're going to be consistently updating as they kind of keep going here. But the idea is to use these Yara rules to, identify vulnerable ones in your org, potentially, using whatever method you can if you're using like Yara, right? And then going and they talk about allow listing and using WDAC and things like that. But yeah, I think it's a tricky topic. I think,
And I think two plugs here, which is one, the Elastic rules that they've publicly released are phenomenal. So if you're looking for ideas or potential stuff, like even if you don't use Elastic products, like you can go look at it and get some really great insight, try and do it. The other one is Splunk, the threat research team. the security content repo has a gold mine and even a nice website to easily search things. Like those two alone, when you're trying to get ideas or you're not really sure of where to start or even where to go to begin, there's great sources. Absolutely love both of those.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I was just kind of rethinking about the ATH, the atomic test harness here. I don't know. Anyway, well, I think we got a jam because we're hitting people's past lunch breaks here, but
should be enjoying lunch while
this
listening
is
to
good.
us
I
ramble
know.
on.
What the heck? what's going on around here? We wanted to at least drop some logs and share. I mean, for the most part, I think we shared everything live, but here it is on a slide. For Sysmon, in our particular testing that we've done here with ATH and atomic test, you have your process creation, your file creates, especially with like something from what's it called, ps.exe. Any kind of service creation we saw with ATH, it'll write straight to the registry. Paul mentioned that you have to reboot in order to, get that thing kicked off. That's such a sneaky way. Love it. Yeah, go ahead.
We forgot one thing here, which is we touched on RPC, but we didn't actually include like RPC things. So from a network perspective, they use pipes, right? So that within RPC, there's going to be pipes. So if you have things like Zeek or you have network monitoring, you have the opportunity at the network level to look for those things from the DCE RPC perspective. And again, another self plug for Jonathan Johnson over at Spectre Ops. He has a great repository on RPC. So not just specifically for services, but a whole bunch of things relating to RPC. Drawing a blank on the actual words. But just breaking down things like print spooler, services, other different things that utilize RPC, and another depth to potential detection and optics into the particular technique at that point. So definitely go check that out as well.
Cool. Yeah, I will try to find the link real quick. I don't think I'm going to find it fast enough.
I will pull it up for you if you want to keep rolling.
Yeah, and then we showed live 7045 events, and when I was playing with the atomic test harness earlier, I kicked it off. There was no sc.exe, obviously. When it did register the service, I got a 7045 event, and I was in my head, I was just kind of like, wow, like as a defender, if I was only looking for SC service executions, sc.exe running or creating a service or even stopping or starting, things like that, like this would be missed. And it kind of showed 7045 as being like a pretty high fidelity log to go and look at for me. And but even the registry values too, like I think there's a lot of money in there too, but I know as any size org, collecting registry can be a beast. So yeah, and at least drop it into like a sim or something like that.
And it could be noisy, right? I was looking at some EDR. It's like, hey, I think potentially like services were abused in some capacity, and going and look in and realizing, okay, on this one particular system, it was being written to a lot from the registry perspective. So I think that's where trying to identify a healthy balance of your Sysmon or EDR, your Windows event logs, but then also like, can you get away with the registry, right? We all know that the registry is where it's going to be written to, and that's going to be the validation aspect if we think it's there. But you got to find that healthy balance of it because, again, to your point, like the registry is so much going on all the time.
Speaking of inventory and registry, a tool that I haven't used enough is Velociraptor, open source. I don't know, would you call that EDR? Is it EDR?
Does it collect and ship it automatically?
It collects.
I feel like this is a great debate. I don't know if I necessarily consider. Well, I think it's a good debate topic. I personally don't think I would consider it an EDR.
Okay.
But it is a super valid and amazing tool from that perspective. Like, not knocking it. But would I put it in the realm of EDR branding? I don't think so.
Okay.
Definitely
but if you wanted to ship it, if you wanted to deploy Velociraptor out there, you would at least be able to collect registry. yeah, driver inventory. And I think
yeah.
they tweeted back a while back on that, was that they do have like inventory and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff, which is great.
they have a lot of great stuff into the
Yeah.
I think it's called the marketplace. I have not
Yeah.
again used it enough, but a lot of people can submit different things into like a marketplace and have different pre-built things to go rip, so you don't have to worry about trying to create it yourself. There's a lot of great
That's cool.
utilities from that perspective.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's neat. Yeah, we'll have to maybe deploy that in a range next time or something if we wanted to show some like that type of data, because I know it's pretty popular.
Yeah, we should get some pros that actually know how to use Velociraptor, and then we can just ask them questions. They can talk and do all the smart things, because
That's a good
definitely
idea.
definitely not me. So if that's you, hit us up. We'll take you on.
Yeah, we got a lot of followers.
Yeah,
we'll give you a sticker.
Hit an all-time high. Yeah, stickers that we don't have yet, but they're coming soon.
Yes, soon.
Mitigations. So we touched a lot on detection and how you can go test this and the different things that are commonly seen from using and abusing services. I think the biggest one FireEye put out this really great. I don't want to call it like an article, but like a paper, if you will.
I think it's a white paper. Yeah.
Like a white paper, yeah, on ransomware protection and containment strategies. Great stuff in there. And honestly, if you implement even a small percentage or fraction of what they recommend, it's a very quick read. You're going to reduce your attack surface quite a bit, especially if you go read any DFIR report. There's a ton of stuff that things for like SMB and services. Like if we can contain and stop that, like as a choke point, you're going to have great success from reducing attack surface. So in this point, being disable SMB ingress. So we touched on like Impact in particular, as well as some other tools. When depending on how you're creating services remotely, they need those open shares. So they need to be able to write to a share. So if we can disable SMB inbound or ingress, so not necessarily outgress. So I still need to connect to my printers or my file servers, but workstation to workstation, even that alone is probably not necessarily utilized, and is easy check in your environment from EDR perspective, like look for inbound connections to the workstations, right? And if we can, validate, okay, we can completely turn it off, or we can modify our GPOs to do that, you'll have some really good wins on that front. Limit admin access, right? We all talked on this, but if we can restrict the amount of ability to create as an administrator on a system services, right, that's going to take a lot away. You need to be an admin to the right to the registry. You need to be an admin to create the services with the different tools. So if we can restrict that, again, we've reduced our attack surface. And speaking of attack surface reduction, attack surface reduction rules or WDAC from Microsoft. They even have a specific one for preventing PS-exec. And I'm sure there's other ones out there that are very similar to from like a remote service standpoint, or even just using those for like weird parent-child process. But again, not super easy just to go into a console and click go. Again, more GPO usage on that front. And of course, the best solution to anything from a computer standpoint, just turn it off and throw it out into a volcano. The safest computer is an off computer.
Yeah.
We all know that, right?
No. Yep. Well said. Oh, that was good. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for live being here. It was a good one.
For those that stuck around through your lunches and listened to our serenading and soothing voices.
Yep. And I think that
advocate for the disabling of landman server. If it's not needed, turn it off.
Shut it down.
If you're not using it, yeah. Legitimately though, like think about we could again go on rambling, but think about from an org perspective, who actually needs to do it, and then try and contain it to only those, right? So concept of, I don't want to say the least privilege in this aspect, but I guess the privilege to do that stuff. Is really thinking about it that way. The more you can contain it, the less your attack surface is, right? But if everybody has it, then it's just wide open. You just get creds and you're off to the races. And if they can do whatever, whenever, then it's off. But yeah, so definitely recommend and advocate for that.
Yeah, it's kind of like to the critical security controls thing, right? Like, yeah. And I know every org it's really hard to just say like, oh, just turn it off. That's such a, yeah. just turn everything off. Like, just turn off the
Yeah.
service or whatever, like widespread. Like, well, there goes my printers that we need to print labels for, and my manufacturing computer that has to ship boxes, 24 hours a day. Like, that doesn't work, Yeah, I think it's just identifying hosts that you can turn off more on or provide more prevention on, and then go from there. I think I actually detailed that in a blog once. Prevention appetite. What's your org's prevention appetite? Like, you'll see CEOs, executives, CXO is going to be very much just, I can't have a password on my screensaver when I'm giving a presentation in front of Goldman Sachs to pay for our next series or whatever, Your developer is going to be, I need to be able to develop, and I need to, do my job and generate drivers. Yes, I agree. And then you're going to have your kind of like typical endpoint, or your typical like accounting person who will probably never need to do this or that with certain things and can be disabled, and it's fine.
I think one of the hardest things that hasn't been solved yet, and if it has, or somebody has a good tool for this, please let us know. But I don't think the ability to understand, if I want to go do X in my environment, like shut off WinRM or shut off RDP, like what's the impact or what's the scope of it? Because to your point, right?
Yeah.
For years, what was it? Just turn off macros, like just disable them. Like,
Yeah.
go work in the legal field for a year or 6 months, and you'll identify that you'll never be able to shut off macros in any capacity except for maybe like 3 systems. But right, so there's just kind of that aspect of being able to identify and contain of like who actually needs it, who doesn't need it, and being able to do that. I don't think that's been necessarily like a good method to do it. I think the tools can help answer those questions, but you ultimately need a framework or a methodology to be able to effectively validate that before putting in those controls, before you just brick the robot on the factory line that costs $100,000 every hour that it's down.
Yep.
I think it's a tough one.
Yeah, it's totally true, and I think that's probably one of the hardest jobs at an organization that's super, what's the word, that has like multiple branch offices, and you have people everywhere, and you're trying to solve or do more prevention in locations that are high risk, and or associates that may be more high risk. You're trying to do prevention, but you're over in one location and they're way over there, and you're all of a sudden disabling macros. It's hard as a defender in those types of situations, and you hope that you can push something like that up to the top, and that folks will want to get behind it and help, what's the right word? Not advertise, but advocate and spread the word that you're trying to do better, obviously, to prevent malicious things from happening. But
Great thought on the RSOP, which is basically a report of the applied GPOs on an endpoint. Absolutely. I think sometimes, though, right, we don't know all of the assets, right? So CIS control number one is a problem, but then, like, how dirty are some of those OUs in that environment that's been around for 3 decades now? So there's always going to be some problem somewhere, but to your point, like, absolutely great utility to utilize and to try and start to at least start the process, right? You got to start somewhere, figure it out, and then figure out how to go forth and conquer whatever that is. But RSOP is a great one to do it from that perspective, from the GPO standpoint. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Services are absolutely insane. The usage of them, prevalence of them from attackers is just still going. I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon, but I think if we can start to steer into more of that preventative and identify the potential methods in which we could turn them off in parts of the org, is going to really just help, again, reduce some of that attack surface, really start to make it harder for the adversary to do whatever they're trying to do. And if we can start thinking about the different methods, right? Once you get a beacon on the box, it's not the end of the world. They have to go somewhere. Well, if we can limit the ability of how they can get there, then we start to see gains. We start to have that force them to have to adapt versus just clicking the easy button and everything's automated and now they're at DA and executing ransomware in small time frames. I mean, go look at the DFIR report. Just read any of them. They're all well written. They all have a lot of data. And services is probably the services and what's the other one? RDP, SMB, and those are like the two most prevalent ones that I see from a lateral movement perspective alone.
Yep. Yeah, this was a good one. I feel like there's still a lot of content here.
Oh, 1,000%. We could go on
but
for
I'm
another
glad-
2 hours.
I know it's Friday, and but I'm really glad that we covered this. Yeah, thank you all for joining and listening, and thank you, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike. And we're gonna get these onto YouTube at some point, so you don't have to worry about trying to catch them live. And then that way we'll also have them.
Yep.
And we'll see you next time. We gotta figure out what we're gonna do next time.
Yep.
Did we decide that?
I don't even know.
I thought we did.
I don't
remember.
Maybe we have minutes to discuss this. No, we'll figure it out. It'll be good.
Yeah,
cool.
For sure.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all. Catch you next time.
See ya.